Among the stories I've got is a kind of sequence of stories about Alexander's, Tales of Alexander, or Seabirds and Alistair, who is one of the people who leaves there. And how, in a sense, the island affected them when they were later of life. So that's on, well, start off at page 69, and then we'll read. This is what they call flash fiction, a story told in about 100 words. This is the first one. After his retirement, Alexander showed signs of how his early years on the islands had affected him. He would spend days at the town's info site, seeing gulls scull above debris. Sometimes he'd watch a DVD of Hitchcock's The Birds, smiling as wings smashed windows and windscreens, terrifying school children with their swoop. The day is coming, sing. But what horrified his wife most was the morning she opened the freezer. Seabirds, wrapped in plastic, were stacked upon its shelves. Icy beaks and heads glittered, frozen feathers sparkled. Best if we prepare, she explained. 2. One afternoon, he began to hear the singing. Its every note was clear and vivid, entering his consciousness so powerfully that there were moments when he was unable to hear anything of the routines of life that occurred around him, the babble of the daytime TV programs that his wife insisted on watching, the flushing of the toilet, the constant thrum of the cars driving past his home. For all that he had not heard its rhythms for years, he recalled instantly why its sound was so familiar, the words and music bringing him back to the island kirk he had attended as a boy, listening once again to the psalms that had swirled and echoed in its walls. He would see once more the heights of Oshavel, Mullaghmore, colourful as he heard it, remembering too the words that were on his lips at that time. Will lift mine eyes from whence doth come my aid. Surrounded by these voices, he began to sing, drawing out the line of psalm and the way he had remembered the old precentor had done as he brought together the congregation in the praise and worship of God. Its rhythms rippled through his senses, its water music flooding the confines of his sitting room. Soon the sofa began to retreat from view. The TV in the corner disappeared. New noises began to invade the songs, ones that he recalled from the island. He introduced small twirls and grace notes, stolen from the throats and beaks of fulmars and gulls into the music, the notes and wrens and blackbirds, the surge of the sea. He mingled all these different noises into his constant rendering of the psalm. It became part of an endless sermon, longer even than the ones that those people had experienced as they sat in their pews in that small kirk on the island. Throughout all this, he ignored the protests of his wife, the complaints of the next door neighbours who had heard his voice through the walls of their semi-detached home, the stares of passers-by who glanced through the window of his home, even the police when they came to the door. Only the singing mattered to him now. Only the singing. I'll read number 4 during this one, and then I'll just finish off. Just to lighten it up after that. See this one. Elizabeth could never forgive her husband for the way their son Alexander Jr. reacted to the presence of X. His fear of them was apparent even when he walked down a supermarket aisle. He would shield himself when he saw yellow curtains labelled with the words cheery eggs. He would recoil when he came across grey boxes with the brand name Nice Lace scrolled on top. It's all your father's fault, she would say. He's responsible for this. She remembered how it had happened. Her husband used to spend much of his weekends looking for crops of seabird eggs that clustered around the small harbour where they lived. He would take them home in shopping bags, boiling them up in a small pan and setting them out before his children on the kitchen table. They're all free range, he would say. None of that rubbish battery stuff. Both Neil and Flora had been content with all this. They could tolerate the slightly salty taste of the eggs these expeditions produced for their breakfast, the odd fleck of birds. It was, however, unfortunate that neither of these children who discovered the membrane of a Fulmar chick inside an eggshell. Instead, it was their younger brother, Alexander. He turned over the beginnings of that bird with a spoon, glimpsing shadows of tiny wings, a beak, a feather in its unfinished form. A moment or two later, and he was sick, vomiting over the kitchen floor. You would never have got off with that on the island, his father declared. There would have been no end to the teasing you would have suffered. After that, however, he tried his best to persuade Alexander Jr. to enjoy the taste of these eggs. He mixed them occasionally with eggs bought from the supermarket, bringing them to the house in cartons marked with the words joyful oat yolks, happy lay, and good yellows. Sometimes he would mix chicken eggs, duck eggs and seabird eggs in the most amazing recipes. Fulmar pancakes, seagull quiche, tern omelette, scrambled black-headed gull's eggs. At other times he would play little jokes and jests on the young boy, removing the top of the egg and putting it carefully back in place, watching as Alexander Jr. swung his spoon, scalping an empty piece of shell, watching it scuttle over the floor. On one occasion, Alexander Sr. filled the empty shell with Fulmar oil he had squeezed carefully from the throat of a bird on the cliff edge. At its centre there was a burning wick he had lit a short time before. He had placed the egg, warm and luminous, on the kitchen table, grinning as his son lifted up the spoon once again, breaking it open to see the strange light flickering within. He used to play that trick all the time on the island, he chuckled. It gave us such a warm glow, it stayed with us for days. Sorry.